Okay, we've still got some people coming in, but I'm going to kick it off. Welcome, I'm Johann from AWA. Kevin and I are going to talk today about how to get SEO and CRO to work together and also why that is a good idea. We're going to look at how you can use CRO principles like A/B testing in an SEO context. For example, how do you run experiments to test your ideas on how to increase visibility, page rank, and all those things, and make sure that you're rolling out changes that have the effect that you imagine. We'll also look at how you can use SEO principles in a CRO context. And though we'll be talking a lot about financial services today, all of these principles are equally relevant to e-com. So I know there are a couple of people who joined the call from that environment, e-commerce. This is equally applicable to you. Just one announcement before we get into it. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the chat window and we can address them at the end of the call. So I'm going to get started. I'll kick us off and Kevin will join us shortly. This is the picture that you may be familiar with. This is one we see in many organizations where you've got SEO and CRO effectively working in silos. So the one silo chases traffic, the other silo chases conversion rate. And what you hope is that they have this multiplying effect that you can see in this model over here. But this is the bottom-up approach of deciding what we're going to focus on. And it pursues different metrics on both sides. And we'll look at some of those metrics and you'll recognize these. So these are the typical metrics that we'll see on SEO and CRO teams. They're typically done in isolation. And the danger with that is, can they work against each other? So can the one hurt the other? Absolutely yes. So for example, you can have a scenario where you improve the conversion rate at the expense of ranking, and which is more important in the long term. You could improve visibility while at the same time, as a result of that, hurting the sales by, say, for example, attracting a different audience. So we'll talk about that. So we're going to talk later on about how to take a different approach. So this is the bottom-up approach where each team, each discipline, think about their own metrics in their own little world, and we'll give you a different way of determining what you should be looking at, top-down approach, which we'll come into. Kevin, I'm going to pull you in here to explain, just from an SEO perspective, the process you follow.
Yes, so for the process here, it's very much, as Johann was saying, it's like how do we get alignment first and foremost at a business level. Where I think SEO in itself can go wrong is people can rush into tactics very quickly. They can look at how do you not just improve rankings, but maybe fix technical issues, or how do you get digital PR coverage. And that's all absolutely fine as a strategy. It's how you do things, but it's not why you do it. And for me, the first step, and quite often the biggest mistake, is you have to understand what that business goal is. So if you're here to drive revenue, what does that look like? And work from the top down first. Where do you make money? What traffic drives that money? What rankings do you need to make more of that traffic, which makes you money? And then once you really understand that, then you can form that into a strategy. So that's where you start looking at how you can build upwards. With the current performance that you have, what I would suggest from here is how do you then take that forward? So looking at prioritizing by value, is there an 80-20 rule on where that traffic is coming from that generates you money? So the example in analytics is ordered by the conversion value. Let's prioritize those pages. And quite often I do think there is an 80-20 rule behind which 20% of pages will drive 80% of your organic revenue. And that's the sort of thing that you really want to be digging into. So content audits, and again, this sounds quite obvious, but you should be auditing the content that you have and making sure that that's working at an optimum level for you before you even think about creating new content. Many people, there's one example that was shared with me even this morning of a high street bank who had 3 pages to sign up for a bank account. And when they looked at what the best page was, it was the one that ranked 3rd in Google. And In that case, you want to think about how you can consolidate content. How do you make sure it's as easy as possible for users to find the right page and to achieve the desired outcome? And the third point here is content gap analysis. So within the marketplace, are there competitors that they have content that you haven't even thought of? Like, what is it that the search demand is showing for what people are looking for that could be content that can help you connect with potential customers? Step 3 is understanding the marketplace. So who's winning, why are they winning, and what are you going to do to catch them? So in this case, there's always algorithm updates, quite frequently, the big ones being more recently the core updates. And this is data from Systrix within financial services of the recent winners and losers. And you have to know who's winning and why they're winning in order to help inform that strategy. What is it that they're doing well, and what is it that Google are rewarding in order to fit that into your own roadmap? Equally, what shouldn't you be doing, and how do you learn from that as well? And externally, you can draw some conclusions, but ultimately, and the purpose of this is that you have to run your own experiments to test and learn what really works for yourself. The fourth step, and almost like the final step before you get into things really, is forecasting that growth opportunity. I quite often get asked, how much should we spend on SEO? Or maybe that sounds quite expensive for SEO expression. And the answer should be based on the growth opportunity, because if the potential to grow is you could achieve millions of pounds worth of profit within a year, then how much would you be willing to pay for that? And in this case, if you have a forecast, you can answer that question. If you don't have a forecast, you're making up a number and a budget that isn't that well informed. It's more gut feel and what you feel like you should be doing. My recommendation on this is to start small but aim big. How do you break things down in a way that people can understand how to focus on traffic buckets, if you like, or keyword groups? And we'll touch on how a lot of SEO is now very much product-led. Also be realistic. So if you're ranking nowhere, to get to number 1 overnight is a very tough, if not unrealistic ask. And how do you break it down of where are we now, where are we going, and where do we expect to be at certain milestones to show that there's progress along that journey? And then the final step in this is really, how do you jump into things and start testing? Because once you have those insights, the baseline and the expectation on what you're looking to achieve, think about things as a product-led roadmap. And this is where you can tie together SEO and CRO, because ultimately you're not trying to improve search, certainly not just search rankings, search traffic, search visibility. You're not just trying to improve conversion rate. You're trying to make more revenue and profit for the business. So if you can bring that together as an aligned, shared goal, it's then much easier to look at that holistically. Likewise, SEO is not a set it and forget it process. If you did an audit in 2006, that doesn't mean that SEO is done. You have to continually improve what you're doing, monitor it because things change, and always look at how you can take things forward. There's not a website on the internet that is 100% perfect in terms of SEO, the traffic it captures and how it engages with its audience. So there's always more that you can optimize and improve. And again, I would highly recommend working in deployment sprints to test, measure, learn and improve. Doing that in an environment where you have reporting based on lead and lag indicators. So you need to know what those big goals are, but ultimately you also need to understand which levers you need to pull in order to go faster or further. And that's really important to show that you are on the right track.
Kevin, I want to pick it up there. So you talk about lead and lag indicators, and we spoke at the top of this session about the bottom-up approach of determining what metrics you look at, and you find those typically siloed metrics. So my own little world, which I'm looking after, and the better approach to do this is to work together towards one common goal. So you ask yourself, what are we trying to achieve as a business? What is our what is our high level objective, our overall objective? And then out of that, what should be the objectives for the individual teams? And there should be a direct line between those team objectives and, the high level business objectives. And then you start cascading down. So you build a model like you see this one here on your screen. And it's not silos then anymore. You've got different branches, CRO, SEO, and others. And you've got all these branches, not silos, working together towards the same goal. And a model like this, a top-down approach like this, does two things. And I really encourage you to map out your goals in this way, because you'll see two things. One, Kevin was just talking about lead and lag indicators, lead and lag metrics. So here, a very good example is the one right at the top. So revenue, that's lag, right? So what that means is you can't act on it. It is what it is. When you look at revenue, it's history. You look in the rearview mirror. So this helps you to determine what are the things that you can actually act on. You can't act directly on revenue. You can't touch it directly, but there are things lower down this model that you can, that's within your control. You can act on it. But it does another very important thing, which is it exposes then what you can measure, what metrics you can use to measure your impact. And then what you have is this view of the impact, the work of everyone and all these teams, and how they roll up together, building up towards that one big high-level goal, the business objective. And you avoid things like we spoke about at the beginning, which is you've got metrics working against each other and effectively hurting the other side. One of the advantages that I really want to talk about a little bit of the teams working together in this way is that you don't find that one team is optimizing the page or the rankings and another team is optimizing the funnel. It becomes optimizing the entire sales conversation. So this, I'll explain that in a moment, but this framework you see in front of you, Ada, that's quite a famous model. I'm going to assume that everyone is familiar with this, but briefly, what it shows is that people, your prospects, your customers, your clients, they flow through various stages before they make that final purchase decision. People don't just come to your site and buy. There's a series of steps that they need to have gone through. Now, the elementary view, the one way of looking at this is to say, okay, so SEO, you belong at the top of that funnel because you bring people into the site, you grab the attention in Google, and then CRO, you work at the bottom of the funnel because you get people to convert. That's all about action, creating desire and action. And well, the more nuanced view, the better view, the way that more experienced teams look at this is to say, how can we join forces to bring our different levels of knowledge and expertise to bear on each of these levels across the entire funnel? And it becomes really interesting. So Kevin and I have been talking about this a lot recently. And so, for example, coming from a CRO perspective and experimentation perspective, as I do, what's really interesting is if you look at this model, you can use SEO principles, for example, to attract a different layer in this model. So you can attract, by using SEO principles, you can attract a different kind of prospect, a warmer prospect, just by changing your keywords and your SEO strategy and going after a different type of user. You can entirely switch the intent of incoming traffic by ranking for a different keyword, a keyword that's associated with warmer traffic. So that's a flavor of the kind of the world that opens up when you step out of your silo and start talking about this broader funnel and how we can combine our knowledge and our expertise to look at the entire piece. And then what we've been alluding to all along is this experimentation. So, in CRO, this is very much part of it. It is synonymous with it. And you all know how it works. It is, you've got two different audiences looking at different versions of a page, and over time, you determine which is the most effective. But this is not something that's commonly applied in SEO. Increasingly, it is taking root. The first people who really spoke about this was Pinterest, and there's the post, the original post from 5 years ago. So it's been around for a while, but they had to figure it out. And there are 3 quotes in this Medium post that I want to highlight. The first one is right there on the screen already, and it's this one. Over time, we found the only way to verify if a change affects the user behavior positively is to run an A/B test. And that has nothing to do with SEO or CRO. That's just the observation from a team of data scientists to say that we can't predict the world. And that's why it's important to talk about experimentation. That's why it's important to talk about A/B testing, which is a form of experimentation, because we just don't know whether something is going to have a certain impact. And if you do a lot of A/B tests like I do, you will see that every day. It's a very humbling thing. And so what the team at Pinterest found, for example, is the second quote here. And this is where it gets interesting. So they say the best strategy for successful SEO can differ by product, by page, by season, and so on. So there's no one size fits all. And again, in the CRO world, we know that. So you test, say, a best practice, or you test a no-brainer, and you find, well, actually, it doesn't work, or it doesn't work as you expected it would. And that's not the end of the road. It takes you onto a new course that eventually does lead you to a win, but it shatters this assumption that there is a best practice, something, a rule of thumb that you can apply and expect a certain outcome. And that's what they found quite early on. And then the last quote: by running a large number of experiments, we found some well-known strategies for SEO didn't work for us, while certain tactics we weren't confident about worked like a charm. This is data scientists and SEO people at Pinterest, at the top of their game, who found by doing experimentation the same way that we do in the world of CRO, that actually the kind of things that everyone's talking about and everyone's putting forward as best practice and no-brainers, actually, when you put them to the test, doesn't quite work like that. And then other things can be surprising. So let's look a little bit about how that might work with SEO, because unlike the CRO, where it's reasonably straightforward, you've got, as long as you understand, I hesitate using the word straightforward, but as long as you have a solid understanding of some of the fundamental rules, you've got tools like Optimizely and Google Optimize that make it possible to make these changes to an experience, a page or a screen or whatever, and then test it. And it's become fairly ubiquitous. So, it's difficult to find an online business, whether in e-commerce or in financial services or in SaaS, that's serious about revenue growth that doesn't do A/B testing. It's that ubiquitous. But the way it works, just to remind everyone, is that you're splitting your visitors, as you can see here. So you've got the same page, you make a change on that page, and then half of your audience sees the original, the control version A, and the other half of your audience will see that new variation, the variation with some changes applied to it. The problem is when you talk about doing this for SEO, you can't split the Google search bot, right? So you can't send half of the search bot to the original and the other half of the search bot to the other page. So you have to work around that. And there are 2 common methodologies. Well, actually there are more, but 2 that I want to share with you today. And this is the first one where you, instead of splitting the visitors, we split the pages. And we've explained why you can't split the visitors, because of the Google bot. So you can do this if you have a template where you've got exactly the same page structure, and you've got a number of pages that make up that template. So a good example of this would be, say, your product detail pages, or maybe information pages. They've got exactly the same structure. And so you could, in half of those pages of that particular template, you can make a change and not make that same change in the other half. And that gives you your control group. So it's half of that template, pages in that template, no change, control group, the other half, of the pages in that template you've made a certain change to. And then you compare, well, first what you do is you send traffic to all those pages as you normally would. The difference here is that it's the same audience. So whereas in a classic A/B test, in a CRO context, we would split the audience here, both of those users are seeing the same pages, and the Google bot is also seeing the same pages. But because you have a control group where no changes are made, and you've got the other half, you can then compare the difference over time. So that's the basic concept. You end up with something like this, where the blue line is the control, that's where no changes were made. And then the red line is that segment of pages that you've made the changes to. And then you've got the dotted line in the middle there that shows when the test was started. And you see, it never really overlaps precisely on the left, because they different pages will react differently depending on the factors that bear on it. But what you want to see after the test has gone live is you want to see that impact, right? So if those lines are still very close together, then you can assume there is no impact. If the red line, so the variant, the pages with a change, if that goes below, dips below the blue line, the control, well, that's an indication that maybe this is not something you want to be doing. And if it goes up towards the right as it does there, well, we all know what that means. That means you are going to get an increase. You've done good work. Now, there are ways to be a lot more scientific about this. So, if you know anything about A/B testing, you know about things like statistical significance, you know about things like statistical power. And so when you compare those different situations, the performance of the variant and the performance of the control, you can get a lot more scientific about that. But even just this, this view where you've got a visible difference between the two, I mean, that's a data point that at least gives you some confidence. Now, I want to show you the other method, because what happens if you don't have a template, right? Or if you don't have enough traffic across that template? And actually, then you can't do this. You can't do this control group versus the variant. So this is actually a more common method. If you go online and you look at the people, the teams who do a lot of this, and the people who are at the forefront of this, then what you'll find is that the method that's far more common is this one, which I'll explain. So it's called time series analysis, but let's explain the detail behind it. And I'll avoid getting into the dirty detail because it hurts my head, and it's beyond the scope of this call. But what you want to do in this case is, it's almost like a before and after. You're not. It's the same page. You're not comparing two different pages against each other. At some point, you make a prediction, and I'll explain how you do that. You make a forecast, and that's the dotted blue line there, based on historic data about what you think the trend for this page will be in upcoming months. So to the left of this vertical dotted line, that's actual data, that's historic data, and that's what's used to inform the prediction. It's your model. It's called the counterfactual. So you've got that blue dotted line, which is the model that predicts what that pattern should look like after you've made the change. Because effectively, it shows you the world without the change, the expected pattern without any change. But you've made a change. You've made that SEO change at the point where that vertical line sits. And then you compare the actual, you measure the actual, which is the red line here, and you compare that against your forecast. So you don't have a control group in this case, but you've got your actuals, which you're comparing against your prediction. And the way, this is not something you want to do in Excel. This is the way to set this up. You probably want to get a data scientist involved, at least just to set it up and guide you through how you would do this in future. And once you've set it up and you've got the guidance, you understand the rules, then it's something you can apply in the same way that you use Optimizely or Google Optimize. But it's not the kind of prediction you want to do in Excel. You want to be a little bit more scientific about that. Now, the most common tool for that, a tool that most data scientists use, is something called causal impact. And this was developed by Google for exactly this purpose. And it's slightly specialist in that you have to plug this into a language like R, which is a statistical analysis language. And so that's where the data scientist is required to set up the initial system for you. And then you have these, this is what a typical report would look like, right? So this is where you don't want to rely just on this or this. You don't want to just compare the two different graphs. You want to be a little bit more scientific about this. Then causal impact can give you that science behind it. And I'll explain these three different graphs. So you've got the left, which is actual data, historic data, the left of that vertical line, and then you've got the three different graphs. So let's run through each of them and see what they all mean. So the top one, that's the original, and that's on the left is the actual data, and then on the right of that dotted line, you see the prediction, what the model predicted it would look like. Then the second one, the second graph there, you see it's something that says pointwise, and that's really the difference between your forecast and your actuals. And this is all done automatically by the tool. And then the last one is the interesting one. So that's the cumulative picture of that difference. And in this case, it clearly shows there's a negative trend. So in this case, it shows that whatever that changes that you made in SEO has not worked well. It's not the kind of thing you want to implement. And the opposite is true. If that graph were to point in the opposite direction, the very bottom graph, then you can conclude that this is a thing that you can implement, an intervention that you can implement. So we avoid getting into the detail of exactly how causal impact works and exactly how the technology behind this and the tech and the dev behind this. But this, once you've set it up, this is the view, this is the report that you'll get, and it's very easy to interpret. And then you can make real confident decisions. And like the people at Pinterest, you'll know for sure, or with great degrees of confidence, whether your changes in an SEO perspective have the desired impact or not. And more importantly, over time, just like we saw in that post by Pinterest, over time, you'll understand which changes and which techniques, which methods are typically more useful to you. So it builds up a body of knowledge that you can use over time across the business. So let's summarize this, and then we can take some questions. I see there's some questions that have come in already. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take a top-down approach. You want to start with the overall business objective, the high-level objectives, and then flowing from that, determine what the teams should be focusing on, those team objectives. And that helps you to determine the metrics that they focus on, rather than let teams come up with their own metrics bottom up, depending on the way they see the world. Second one is, Kevin spoke to this at length, is working in product-led sprints. And that really means that you combine these different disciplines, CRO, SEO, CRO, and various others, into the same team, working towards the same common goal in a time-boxed fashion. And then lastly, very importantly, is like in CRO, you test everything. And you, over time, it has two benefits. Not only do you find what you should roll out and what you should hold back, and you get to keep the losers and continue only with the winners, but also you learn from this experimentation over time. And so it builds up this body of knowledge that you can apply across the business. Before we get into questions, I'm going to give Kevin an opportunity to come in here, and if you have any other thoughts or any gaps you wanted to fill in, Kevin.
I think actually one of them follows on with one of the questions we've been asked, to be honest. So I think it's, how do you bring it together, and also how do you have that testing environment that is the correct way of doing things, or at least the most accurate way of doing things. And I think we probably need to caveat this, that nothing is ever kind of 100% perfect. It's how do you improve what you have and take it forward. And I think for me, it's really kind of how do you set that environment up from a testing perspective of SEO wise. There's a couple of ways you can do things. One is you have a before and after. So you benchmark what you're doing, you understand the current performance once you have that benchmark, and you make changes, and then you see what happens afterwards. And that's very good. That can show you certainly at a page level how things can improve. But the caveat behind that is seasonality. So if you're, let's say, in the travel space and you're testing something in December versus January, you would expect to see a spike kind of almost as soon as Boxing Day hits and January comes around the corner. You'd expect to see a spike. So in that case, it doesn't necessarily mean the changes that you've made are the right ones. So sometimes how do you test groups of similar pages at the same time as testing the control group versus the test on those similar pages can be a better way to do it as well. So it's setting up the right environment, not just for the right specific test pages, but also the period of time that you're testing that across to.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. That's a good point, and I'm gonna elaborate on that shortly. Just to remind everyone, if you there's some questions coming in. If you have a question for us, put it in the chat box. We'll pick it up and we'll reply to it. Just to build on what you said, Kevin, there's and that's what I meant earlier when I said that, you know, running an A/B test in a CRO context is reasonably straightforward as long as you understand some fundamental principles about it. And, you know, one of those is generalizability. You know, so is the outcome of a particular test, if you run a test around Black Friday and you get a massive win or a loss, whatever the outcome is, how applicable is that learning to February or March traffic? You know, these are the kinds of questions you have to keep in mind when you have outliers like that. When you do, I spoke about the predictions that you do and the tool causal impact that helps you do that. That would, depending on the historic period that you use to make that prediction, that would take into account the ebbs and flows of that historic data. So if you model it over a long enough period, then those ups and downs in your curve will be taken into account in that prediction, and then you can compare with reasonable confidence the actual with that prediction. Kevin, there's another question for you, which I think you can take, about the tools that you might use.
Yeah, so there's various different tools that I would suggest further down the line. I think initially the tools are more kind of how do you take that test group. One thing we've done, and this touches on Adrian's question a little bit as well, which just to read it out for anyone that hasn't seen it, if the pages are for different products, for example, might the difference between the pages affect the results? And the answer is yes, absolutely. But I think over a longer period of time, it's how do you see the trends? And the example that I have here, which will also touch upon the tools used, is we did a piece of work with Expedia, and actually this is a public case study on our website, but we focused on the line of business for car hire, and the results were benchmarked by the previous year and previous years within that car hire section of the website, but also compared to the overall site average. And I guess to go back a step, the challenge and the problem we had in the early stages was that if Expedia's traffic goes up by 10%, why did it go up 10%? Because at an enterprise level, when you're making so many different changes, you're running TV ads, etc., it's really hard to pinpoint the activity that drove that growth. Whereas if you start to look at it at a line of business perspective, you can see, okay, well, which sections of the site are doing really well. So for us to be able to say, and again, I need to refresh myself on the numbers, but car hire in particular went up by I think it was 40% year on year in both traffic and organic revenue. That's great, but what does it mean in relation to the site? And actually the answer was it was a 180% uplift in comparison to the site average and other top performing lines of businesses. So you completely caveat that with not all things are equal. Car hire versus flights is not a 100% fair comparison, but it also helps to give you a bit more perspective behind that. The tools that we used in this instance to do it was primarily how do you link it to business data as much as you can. So analytics data from a revenue conversion perspective, also from a traffic perspective. There's tools on the market from an SEO perspective that you can look at for grouping together types of keywords. So for example, SEO Monitor is very good at saying, here's a keyword group for a common group of themes. So if you're in financial services, that could be mortgages or car insurance, for example. How do you take that and show the progress that's being made, not just on the overall goal, which is the ultimate aim, but the KPIs that are showing progress on the way forward. So ranking visibility being quite a big one. Further down the line, and certainly at an enterprise level, you might want to speed up the number of tests that you get through, because the quicker that you move, the more impact that you can have. And there's tools on the market. There's one, Search Pilot, which used to be Distilled ODN, which is a good option for showing how you can make bulk changes and A/B split tests between the results as a before and after. So I think that helps in terms of fast tracking, but there's certainly a number of things that you can do before you get to that point that helps you to set up the controlled environment that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because when I showed those two methods, those are two ways in which you can DIY it, so you can do it yourself. But you mentioned the tool there, which is it's an enterprise tool that's available that does this for you, so you don't need to get into the detail of getting data scientists involved in building a system for you and plugging packages into R and other things that you don't need to understand.
Yeah.
There is that. There's a question that I just quickly want you to touch on, because it links to what we spoke about earlier on about conflicting metrics. Is the goal for SEO always more organic traffic?
No, and I'd say that actually the goal is dependent on the client and the brand. I've had clients where they're on a impression basis, or sometimes they might be a startup and they're just looking to get awareness and they want more traffic. I will always challenge them and ask them why, and like, so what, is that important? And sometimes the answer is yes. I think more often than not, the answer is no. The answer is, how do we get you more revenue? And there's a client that we worked with, and again, actually, this is a public case study that we have, so happy to talk about this as well. But we did some work with Oka, who they sell luxury furniture, and for them, it was never about how do we get more traffic. And we explained at the very start that I think they initially had two goals. One was, how do we get more organic traffic? One is, how do we get more organic revenue? And I remember my reaction at the time was, pick one. What is the big one that you really want to get? And we will focus all our effort behind it, because there's different techniques to how you achieve both. If you're looking to get more traffic, you go for the highest search volume. If you're looking to get more revenue, you're going for the products that drive you, obviously maximum revenue, but also like looking at paid search, where is it that your conversions are going from? And ultimately it was revenue driven, and I think it should be in most cases. It should be commercial. How do we pinpoint where your customers are, which search queries they're spending money from? And then traffic, you always like to see going upwards, but if you had a choice of, does your analytics look nice or does your bank account look nice, I think you would choose your bank account. So it's trying to prioritize based on value, and more often than not, money talks.
Yeah, just a final reminder, if you have a question, you can pop it in the chat box, and we've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Just to pick up on something you said, Kevin, even even within CRO, where you've got these metrics that I showed earlier on, so you could have a situation where you've got conversion rate going up, but revenue going down. That is the danger in building this from the bottom up, in obsessing over the metrics that you feel you can control, and therefore you should be looking at without having a view in the bigger picture. There is a question from Martin. How do you account for multiple variables in play? For example, changes you made on your page and a core algorithm update. That's an interesting question, because you spoke earlier, Kevin, about that recent update, and we saw the impact that had. And so this is an important question, and it's back to the comment I've made about whether you do experimentation in an SEO context or CRO, you need to understand some fundamental principles and rules, and this is one of them. So if you have a control group, if you use that first method where you've got changes made on half of the pages and the rest of the pages serve as a control group, well, you can account for that, because the pollution or the effect of that hidden variable will be present in both control and variant. If you're going to be doing time series analysis, the second method we looked at, this is something you're going to have to bring into account. You're going to have to take that into account. Seasonality is easy to plot out, because, as I said, these models will take that into account. So if it so happens that the period that you are predicting, if that falls in a season, peak season, the algorithm, as long as you've got enough data informing that model, should take that into account. The algorithm doesn't know when Google is going to launch its next update. So that's something that you will have to, in your analysis, will have to bring into the picture if you go for the time series analysis method. Anything you want to add, Kevin?
Yeah, I think for me, it's SEO is about playing the long game. So there's an example on one of the slides I shared of the winners and losers in financial services, and one of the winners is a client that we work with, and we did an SEO audit for them in January, implemented a number of the actions in February. In March, there was a core algorithm update, and they actually dropped in overall visibility. In May, they then went back up. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean the changes that we made in February were wrong, because they went down in March, and hopefully the signs that they've gone back up again in May is a good thing. It's sometimes you have to look at what you're doing. You still need to try and measure things as specifically as possible. Certainly if there's types of pages that you're making changes to, how do you pinpoint that? SEO is a good example of a lot of sites do migrations, some of them are phased, and how do you take the pages that are being migrated and measure and test and learn in a controlled environment in the right way, so that then you can pinpoint things. And quite often, I've seen a number of clients come to us and say, we've been hit by a Google penalty, how can we fix it? And when I dig into things, it's not a Google penalty at all. It could be they've done a site migration, they've changed the website design, and it's happened a month, maybe weeks before, to the point that when they look at the trends that have dipped in analytics, it coincides with the algorithm update, and they just assume this must be a Google change, not us. And I think, to me, that highlights the need to do things like using the annotations in Google Analytics. If you make changes, make a note of when those dates were, so that then you can pinpoint back and trace back to what's been changed when, and then you have all of that information to look at. But definitely don't just assume because you've seen a spike in a Google algorithm update date range, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is an algorithm update. Definitely investigate it, but it's not always the case as well. There's often things that can coincide.
Thanks, Kevin. There's one last question which I left for last because it's not an easy answer. And the question is, how do you do that causal impact analysis, that gets into the detail a little bit, which, as I said, I think is really a separate topic for a separate call, because that is an in-depth detail. What I can offer is to say, if you are interested and if you want to learn how to do that, get in touch with us, and we'll happily give you some resources and give you some pointers and help you get it set up. Unless there are any other questions, folks, we're going to leave it here. So if you want to squeeze in a final question, if you have something on your mind. Otherwise, thanks very much for attending today. Thank you. And I hope to see you all on the next one. Kevin, thanks as always.
Yeah,
cheers, everyone.